Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. So today I'm going to share with you the story The Fall of House of Usher. During the whole life of dull and dark and silent day in autumn of the year, I had traveled alone on horseback towards the house of Usher. As I came in sight of the place, my spirits sank. They grew as dark as and dull as the sky above me, and sat as cold as grey walls of the building before my eyes. I did not know the reason for this feeling in extreme misery unless it resulted from general appearance of decay about the house and about the grounds which surrounded it. There were the great dark windows like black eyes in the empty face. The white trunks of the lifeless trees stood out on the bank of a lake whose still waters acted as a mirror to the scene above. The scene mirrored in the lake seemed even more sorrowful than the reality. In the end, I gave up my spirits to s- to solve. The scene mirrored in the lake seemed more sorrowful than the reality. The owner of the property, Roderick Usher, had been one of my closest friends, but some years had passed since our last meeting. Had He had recently sent me an urgent invitation to visit him, had begged me, in fact, to stay with him for several weeks. He wrote that he was suffering from a severe illness, a mental disorder. My companionship, he thought, would cheer him and bring calm to his troubled thoughts. He was so sincere about all this and much more that I did not think twice. And here I was at the house of Usher. Although as boys we had been best friends, I really knew little about Roderick Usher. I remember that he had always been quiet and liked to keep himself apart from the people. His ancient families had been noted through the centuries for their sensitivity and imagination, and these had shown themselves in great work of art and music. I knew too the very unusual fact that there were no branches to the family of Usher. The name and possessions simply passed without any interruption from father to son. The house of Usher meant to the people of the area not only to the property but also to the family. As I came near the great grey building, a strange idea took shape in my mind. I sensed that the air which surrounded the house was different from the rest of the God's air. I felt that it came from the decayed trees and the grey walls and the silent lake, and the air itself was grey. It hung above the place like a cloud. I had some difficulty in throwing this foolish thought. The house, now that I could see it clearly, looked extremely old. The building was still complete. I mean, there was no part of stonework had fallen, but each separate stone was itself a powdery ruin of what it had been. There were no other signs of weakness except a long narrow crack which ran from the roof right down from the front of the house to the level of the ground. A servant took my horse, and as I entered the hall, I was then led in silence through many dark and narrow passages to the master's room. Much that I noticed on the way had a great effect on me. Although I had used all my life to the surroundings, such as these, the expensive furniture, the heavy curtains, the weapons, and the row of pictures on the wall. On one of the stairways, I met the family doctor, who seemed both confused and frightened by my presence. The room of my host, which I reached at last, was very large and dark, and with a great deal of fine old furniture in it. Books and musical instruments lay scattered around, but somehow failed to give any life to the scene. I felt that I breathed an air of sorrow. Usher greeted me warmly. We sat down, and for some time moments I looked at him with a feeling of great pity. Surely no man had ever changed so terribly and in a short time. He had been pale, but never as pale as this. His eyes, always attractive but now unnaturally large and bright. His thin lips had been reduced to a line on his face. The fine, soft hair now floated, uncut, like that of an old man, around his face and neck. The changed manner of my friend was equally striking. He was all the time in the state of great excitement, of great anxiety. As he passed quickly from one to the other of these conditions, his voice changed. The wild high note would drop suddenly to a steady, careful sound like the speech of a man who had drunk too much. It was in this way that he spoke of my visit, of his great desire to see me, and of the comfort that he expected me to bring him. He began a long description of his disease. It was that he said a family evil, which there seemed to be no cure, a simple nervous disorder, he added, which would doubtless soon pass. He suffered a great deal from sharpness of senses. He could eat only tasteless food and wear only a certain kind of clothing. He could not bear the smell of the flowers. The faintest light brought pain to his eyes, and he had forbidden all songs in the house except those from certain musical instruments. I am afraid of the future, he said, not the events of the future, but the effects on me. I tremble at the thought of any, even the smallest event which may increase my anxiety. I am not afraid of the danger except its most extreme effect, terror. In my weakened state, I feel that the time will soon or later arrive when I must give up life and reason together in my personal struggle with fear. It was a great shock to me to learn that he had not left the house for many years. The house, he said, the actual walls and towers of the building have gained an influence over me, a strange power that holds me to them. And if they were living creatures, I did not know what answers to make my friend. He admitted that much of the unhappiness which he suffered had a simple and quite natural origin. It was long and severe illness of a great loved sister, his close companion for many years, his last and only relative on the earth. She will die very soon, he said with a bitterness which I can never forget, and her death will never leave me in the last of the ancient family of Usher. While he spoke, Lady Mandeline passed slowly through the room at the far end, and without having noticed my presence, I disappeared. I watched her with a surprise and deep fear that I could not account for. As soon as she had gone, I as soon as she gone, I turned myself to my friend. He had covered his face with his hands to hide a flood of tears. The disease of Lady Mandeline had defeated the skill of her doctors. She was no longer cared whether she lived or died. A gradual but continuous loss of flesh caused a weakness of body, which was made worse by the frequent stoppings of action of her heart. With great sorrow, my friend told me that there was little difference between these attacks and actual death. She will now have to remain in bed, he said, and I do not think that you will see her alive. For several days following my arrival at the house, neither of us mentioned her name. During this time, I had great efforts to comfort and cheer my friend. We painted and read together, or I listened as if in a dream to the music which he played. We grew closer and closer in friendship and shared our most secret thoughts, but it was all useless. Darkness continued to pour from his mind onto everything around us in the endless flood of misery. I shall always remember that many sad hours which I spent like this alone with the master of the house of Usher, but I cannot properly explain our studies and activities in words. He was a man of high beliefs which he had confused during his long illness. He could now express these beliefs and feelings only in the colors and sounds, in the wildest kind of paintings, and in the difficult music that he wrote himself. The results were not clear to even to himself. It may imagine how hard it was for me to understand them. I thought that that in one of his pictures the idea was a little clearer, although I myself could not understand it. But I remembered that the picture, it caused me to tremble. As I looked to it, it showed me a very long passage with low walls and smooth and white. The background suggested that the passage was very far below the surface of the earth, but there was no way out of it that I could see. No lamps were shown and not any other artificial light, but the whole scene was bathed in the flood of bright light. During one of our discussions, Usher told me that he believed all plants had the power of feeling. He thought that even the lifeless objects would have this power under certain conditions. As I have already mentioned, his belief was connected with the grey stones of his home. He thought that the way they were arranged in the walls and the way arranged for 100 of years gave them a life of their own. The water of the lake too and the dead trees shared their life, he said. He added, the proof of feelings in the walls and in the water can be seen as gradual but certain development of an air of their own. I remembered my thoughts as I had come near the house, and I caught my breath. This air had an excellent and tremble influence on my family, he said, and it made me what I am. One evening, Usher informed me in a few words that Lady Magdalene was dead. It was his intention, he said, to keep her body for 2 weeks before burial in one of many rooms below the house. His reason for this decision was not unnatural, as he had taken into account the particular kind of disease from which she suffered. In plain words, he wished to be sure that she was really dead before he placed her body in the family grave. At the request of Usher, I helped him in making these arrangements. We two alone carried the body in the box to a small dark room that lay below the part of the building where I myself slept. It had been used in troubled times of a long time as a storeroom for a gunpowder or some other dangerous substance. Part of its floor and the whole of a long passage through which we reached were lined with a red metal. The heavy iron door was protected in the same way, having placed the box containing the body on a low table. We partly raised its lid and looked at the face inside. I immediately saw the brother and sister were exactly alike. Usher, guessing my thoughts, said that they had been twins and the deep sympathies had been existed between them. There was light color on her face and neck and a sane smile, so terrible in death, on her lips. We did not look at her for long, but put back and nailed the lid and closed the iron door and made our way back to the upper part of the house. It was after 3 or 4 days of a bitter grief that I noticed a change in the manner of my friend. His ordinary activities, his music, books, paintings were forgotten. He wandered from room to room doing nothing, interested in nothing. He grew paler than ever and brighter left his eye. There were times when I thought that he had a secret to tell me and that he had lacked the courage to tell it. At other times, he sat for hours listening with great intention to some imaginary sounds and as if expecting unusual to happen. Is it any wonder that his conditions filled me with fear, or that I felt the wild influences of his own strange, impressive beliefs spreading to me? On the 7th or the 8th night after the dark of Lady Magdalene, I experienced the full power of these feelings. For a house I lay struggling against a sense of fear. I blamed my surroundings, the dusty furniture, the torn demanding my experience, the torn But my efforts were useless. At last, thoroughly afraid, I got up and looked as hard as I could into the darkness of the room. I heard, or I thought that I heard, certain low sounds that came from time to time through the pauses in the storm. Dressed quickly, since I was trembling, but whether with cold or fear, or I do not know. To calm myself, I walked quickly backwards and forwards across the rooms. I had done this 2 or 3 times when there was a gentle knock at my door and Usher entered, carrying a lamp. There was a look of crazy excitement in his eyes. "And you have not seen it?" he cried. "Suddenly, you have not? But wait, you shall say, you shall." Saying this and carefully shading his lamp, he hurried to one of the windows and threw it open to the storm. The force of the wind that entered nearly lifted us from our feet, but it was not the wind that held our attention, not the thick clouds that flew in all directions about the house. We had no view of the moon or the stars, but the building and all the objects around us. Even the clouds above were shining in the strange and unnatural light. The light poured from the walls and from the waters of the lake. You shall not look at this," I said, as I led from the windows to the seat. "And not uncommon. Let us close the window. The wind is cold and dangerous to your health. Here is one of the favorite books. I will read and you shall listen. So we shall pass this terrible night together." I began to read and Usher listened, and I appeared to listen with the great attention. It was a well-known story by Sir Lon Scott Canning. After I had reading for 8 or 10 minutes, I reached the part where the chief character forces his way onto the home of his enemy. At this point, the story goes on as follows: "And Ethelred lifted his sword and struck the door with heavy blows. He cracked and broke and tore its apart, so that the noise of the dry and hollow soundings would seem to fill the forest." At the end of this sentence, I paused. I thought that I could hear through faintly just such a noise like breaking wood. It seemed to come from some distant part of the house. It must have been, I believed, some damage caused by the storm, and I decided immediately that there was nothing in it to interest or worry me. I continued the story. Then the good Ethelred, entering through the door, was surprised to find a terrible creature standing guard in front of a palace of gold, and with a floor of silver, and on the wall hung a large shining shield. There on the shield these words were written: "He who enters here has won a victory. He who kills the guard shall win the shield." And Ethelred lifted his sword again and struck the head of the creature, which died with cries so wild and terrible that they shook the walls. The metal shield then crashed onto the floor, so Ethelred's feet. Here again I felt afraid, and I forced to stop my reading. There was now no doubt at all that I did actually hear a faint, but a clear cry of pain. It was closely followed by the distant sounds of metal being struck. I was not sure that Usher had himself heard these sounds, and I rushed trembling to the chair in which he sat. His eyes were fixed on the door, his lips were moving, and as I bent over him, I heard the words: "Do I hear it? Yes, I hear it, and I have heard it. Long, long, and long, for many minutes, many hours, many days, I have heard it, but I dared not. Oh, pity me, miserable creatures that I am! I dare not to speak. We have put her living on in that box. Did I not tell you that my senses were sharp? I now tell you that I heard her first moments many days ago, but I dare not speak. And now today, Athrel, ha ha, the breaking of door and the death cry of the creature and crashing of the shield say instead the forcing of the box, and her cries struggles in the metal passage of her prison. Oh, where shall I hide? Will she not soon be here? Is she not going to hurry to punish me in the speed of burying her? Have I not heard the footstep on the chair? Can I not feel the heavy beatings of her heart? Crazy fool! Here he jumped to his feet and shouted the words. Crazy fool! I tell you that she now stands outside the door. As if in the force of his voice there was some special power, the great door opened. It was the work of rushing winds, but then outside the door there did not stand the tall white clothed figures of Lady Magdalene of Usher, covered in blood from some terrible struggle. For a moment she remained trembling in the doorway, then with a low cry she fell heavily inward onto her brother. The shock brought death to Usher immediately, and a moment later his sister died beside him. I ran from that room and from that house in fear, and it did not look back until I passed the lake. A great noise filled the air as I watched the crack that I spoken of, that ran from the roof of the building to the ground, widened the jaws of some terrible creatures. The great walls broke apart. There was a sound like the voice of sound thousands water, and then the deep dark lake closed over the ruins of House of Usher. I hope you liked and enjoyed my short story, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos and comment below how you find this story. Thank you for watching me.